Sitting in front of me is our panel of judges for the evening. We have Dawn Troyer from Penn High School, Michael Yakey from Bethany Christian High School, Anna Carmen from Columbus East. We have James Bassett from Carroll High School, and Shankar Krishnan from Bloomington South. The motion that our teams will be debating this evening reads, "This House would prevent the use of social media to defame or slander individuals who have been publicly accused of wrongdoing but not convicted of a crime." Sitting to my right is our proposition team, team EO12. And sitting to my left is our opposition team, team FO12. And so with that, I will turn things over to our debaters.
Before we begin, ladies and gentlemen, I will knock on the table once for you when protected time has expired at the beginning of the 8-minute speeches, and that's 1 minute before the end.
Can we do thank yous?
Yeah, of course.
Yes. And since I just did this, it reminded me to remind everyone else, if you haven't already done so, please take a moment to make sure that your phones are all the way silenced and in airplane mode. Thank you.
Alright, so before I begin, I would just like to do some thank yous. I just want to thank everyone in my team, West Lafayette team, for being super supportive of everything I've done so far. I would like to thank my amazing teammates and my coach, Mr. Smith, and everyone who's helped me on the journey so far, and all of the amazing World Schools debaters here today with us, and all of the judges for helping judge me. So with that being said, everyone ready? Okay, let's begin. Put yourself in someone else's shoes. Imagine being publicly accused of sexual misconduct, but you haven't done anything. You're completely innocent. Eventually, allegations spread to social media. The already negative public opinion gets exponentially worse. This defamation comes with an enormous emotional toll. Slander and defamation have been prevalent since the early colonization of our country. The Salem witch trials were a series of false accusations that led to the death of colonial women. None of these accusations were true, but women were subject to slander and defamation because they were witches. In fact, you're a witch, maybe you're a witch. But see how these claims are absolutely absurd? So because of this, my team and I believe that no innocent man or woman should be subject to this behavior. And we stand in firm proposition that this House will prevent the use of social media to defame or slander individuals who have been publicly accused of wrongdoings but not convicted of a crime. So our definitions are from Black's Law Dictionary, and this dictionary provides a greater coverage of terminology in this round. So first, our first contention, which is court of law. I would like to define some things in here. So first, I would like to define slander, which is a defamatory assertion expressed in a transitory form. Black's Dictionary goes on to say that damages for slander, unlike those for libel, are not presumed and thus must be proved by the plaintiff. Slander is actionable only on proof of actual damage. Now we would like to define defamation, which is the act of harming the reputation of another by making a false statement to a third person, or in this case, social media. So we've already proven that the assertions are slanderous, which resolution clearly assumes. Then a defamatory or false claim has already been proven in a court of law. That means that someone's life has been ruined or in some way.
Yes. Only 2% of sexual assault allegations are false, whereas women have a 33% chance of being sexually assaulted in their lifetime. Shouldn't we prioritize the rights of victims and survivors?
We should, but in this case, right now we're talking about slander and defamation, which, as I have defined earlier, means you're talking about something that is completely false. So if I go on, it means that someone's life has been ruined in some way, and it means that they've lost their career, their family, or a sizable portion of business. And as we have defined, according to Black's Law Dictionary, both slander and defamation pertains to false allegations. meaning that this resolution specifically pertains to these false allegations against an innocent person. This is extremely important to realize, not only because of a moral standard, but also because of issues concerning the illegality of an issue. So one of the most important things that I'm sure both my teammates and my opponents will agree with me is that everyone, no matter who you are, under legal terms, has the right to a fair trial. With slander and defamation going on, this skews the credibility of a trial, and trials are extremely important because they're the way to make people who actually commit crimes go to jail. So in court, one of the most inherent rights people have under a justice system is due process. Now, the definition of due process under Black's Law Dictionary is the conduct of legal proceedings according to established rules and principles for protection and enforcement of private rights, including notice and the right to a fair hearing before a tribunal with the power to decide the case. So due process is absolutely necessary before any accusations, especially false accusations, are to be claimed. Now, this falls over the idea that we followed of innocent until proven guilty. But in this case, as we proven earlier, slander and defamation are literally false allegations made against a person. So in the context of this resolution, these people are actually innocent. So it would be absolutely ridiculous to not prevent people spreading lies about others to ruin their lives, especially since these people have been proven to be innocent. This leads us to our second contention, which is journalistic integrity. Journalists have degrees for reporting the news, and credibility is the most important factor in getting those guilty of serious misconduct convicted. Now, there's both accountability, not right now, and credibility in reporting. And this is a line of demarcation because journalism can use anonymous sourcing effectively and safely. There can be serious investigations through journalistic means, unlike social media. Now, on social media, the personal information of the accuser can be discovered, so preventing falsehoods protects not only those accused falsely, but also those making the claims. For those who have actually committed a wrongdoing, false allegations will be spread like ink in water over social media. However, journalists can sift through falsehoods to find credible truths. Essentially, the ugly truth is that social media is extremely capable of spreading false information, and not only is this morally detrimental to our society, but it infringes on the ideas of justice. Just like the Salem witch trials, with slandering. Yes?
On the issue of due process, someone doesn't have to undergo a trial to ensure that they can be accused of a crime. Someone has to undergo a trial to ensure they can be convicted of it. Social media is simply the place for accusations.
Thank you. But what I'm saying right now is everyone should have the right to due process, which is the fair and free trial. But in this fair trial, these are skewed when there is slandering on social media. So just like these Salem witch trials, the slandering and defamation of innocent individuals on social media has yet yielded nothing but negative impacts. We need to defend innocent people rather than open them up to defamation and slander. Because of the special nature of social media and because of the innocent man or woman should not be subject to such scrutiny, we stand in firm affirmation on this proposition.
Folks, if you could please give us your names when you come up to speak. We don't know all of you.
Sorry.
First, I would like to begin by saying a quick thank you to my teammates who have been absolutely wonderful teaching me world schools, and our coaches as well, our parents for supporting us every step of the way, and all of our fellow teammates at our school who have been nothing but supportive this entire tournament. Thank you so much. Are my friends ready? Yes. Are my other friends ready? I know she's ready. Oh, Callie Jonson, sorry. Judges ready? should begin. Living in a republic, most of the people in this room, like myself, likely put a lot of trust in the courts to administer justice. That is, until you examine those who the courts do not work for. It is because we recognize the public right to compensate for the court's inaction with social discussion that we proudly propose. To begin, I'd like to contest the proposition's definition of slander and defamation. We believe that they have confused this with libel, that slander and defamation are not inherently false in themselves. We define slander and defamation as to publish information via social media, which negatively harms an individual's reputation. We would like to clarify that we still support national laws for different countries restricting free speech, as in hate speech in Germany and law that incites lawless action in the United States. Do not let the proposition misconstrue our arguments being for unregulated social media. Our stance is that we do not support people intentionally sharing things like false information and do not think this is a goal to work towards. However, this debate places a much higher burden on both sides than determining whether or not slander and defamation are preferable. Rather, we think that in the case slander and defamation, not right now, are necessary to public discussion or to compensate for the court's inaction, this House does not have the right to definitively forbid these actions. Prop has the burden to prove that they do. Moving to our first contention of free speech, yes.
Before you get to that, can you please tell me where you got your definitions for slander and defame from?
We also got them from the legal dictionary, in which it states that libel is separated as libel is inherently false.
Okay, thank you.
Our first layer is the impact on an individual, in which an individual right to free speech is pivotal to democracy and successful societies nationwide. Individuals are allowed free speech more often through social media, which enables them to connect with others and display their viewpoints. Ideology should be freely expressed and not censored, as in nations like North Korea, Russia, China, and Myanmar. These individuals have their rights fundamentally stripped, and as a result, their identity is fundamentally stripped from them. Thoughts are worth nothing if confined to your mind, and can't result in any action. As we have established that individuals have the right to free speech, it is important that we further analyze this impact on government and the development of free speech, as well as why this precedent tells us that restrictions of individuals with regards to defamation and slander and social media are incredibly unjust. Our second layer is the impact on our system of government. First, we can begin with an establishment of free speech in the United States colonies. In 1735, when Peter Zenger, a newspaper owner, published a true newspaper article about government officials in which he defamed them. The definition of libel was, at the time, attacking any government official. While the judge in this case wanted to convict, the jury ruled that he was innocent and merely practicing free speech. This is a foundation for how our modern legal system construes freedom of speech, which is widely protected by the courts. We believe in the intent of New York Times, the United States, in which the court ruled that although the New York Times was defaming the federal government by publishing these Pentagon Papers, they could publish them because they displayed to the public what the federal government failed to tell them. This serves as a legal precedent for our current scenario, in which by defaming an individual on social media, a user can spread word to others what they should know. Our system of government inherently protects free speech, and what the founders, such as Madison, would have intended. But it's not only our government. This is a universal concept. The free speech is in the preamble to the United Nations Charter, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And furthermore, natural rights philosophy emphasizes our liberties, particularly freedom of speech, as being absolutely pivotal. And this is why the restriction on free speech, even in the case of defamation or slander, is dangerous to governments worldwide, why we strongly oppose this motion. Yes.
Aren't there restrictions on free speech all the time? Yelling, firing, cutting, nuclear. These limitations are meant for common sense reform. So if someone is spreading lies to the entire world, or anyone who's connected on Google, social media, they can see them. Isn't that just as dangerous?
Well, the case we're quoting is Schenck, the United States, and in that case, what the Supreme Court determined was that the fire in the credit theater example was the clear and present danger test, in which they ruled against Schenck in the interest of national security, that Schenck was depending on reform movements and not simply slandering somebody on social media. Our second contention is that public discussion is necessary for representing survivors and victims' rights. Around the world, victims, survivors, and allies of crimes such as sexual assault make their plea on social media, a plea for justice to come to their aggressors and attackers, a plea for public discussion to condemn individuals who are rarely held accountable for their actions by the confines of traditional courts. The plights and experiences of marginalized communities who seek redress from a government who fails consistently to provide them with it depend upon the platform of social media to share their voices. Look to the example of the Me Too movement, now a global movement extending to the United States, Germany, India, Tibet, and beyond. In this instance, people often look to social media platforms such as Twitter to first call out their aggressors. This is a necessary form of defamation to counter the societal malice of ignoring the plights of victims and survivors. And second, to connect with the global community facing the same issues of violence and recovery. In the case that social media users must defame or slander certain individuals to promote societal discussions necessary to give justice to those who are too powerful and advantaged for a court to ever convict them of wrongdoing. We must, yes.
Can societal discussion be started in many different ways other than slandering an individual?
Absolutely, but in this case, they're convinced as slandered, and in this motion, we are stating that they're slandering an individual in an instance to promote their own values of being victims. And so in order for them to make their own case, they must inherently slander said individual. We must ask ourselves the question, why are traditional courts not competent in starting this discussion and paying reparations to survivors and victims themselves? Courts often work to the advantage of historically powerful and elite populations, providing unjust representation to marginalized communities. Look to the example of the U.S., where even in a constitutional democracy, thousands of rape kits go untested every year because the government does not deem sexual assault investigations to be important enough to deviate resources to. Where even a convicted rapist, Brock Turner, was convicted of sexual assault, and the court sentenced him to a meager 6 months in jail. When courts fail to hold oppressors accountable, we cannot deprive the people of the right to take on this duty. And thus, we proudly and very strongly oppose this motion.
Like everyone else, I would like to start off with some thank yous before I get into my second constructive. Firstly, I'd like to thank my coach, Mr. Smith, my team, Evie and Nate, and Madeeha over there. Everyone has been really helpful on our way to finals today, and it's been really great. Also, other Westside team, it was really great to collaborate with everyone. Everyone who did Worlds here, it was really a pleasure to debate everyone, and I really enjoyed this experience. Novice policy, if you did novice policy last year, I thank you. It was a great experience. And with that out of the way, let's get into it. Opponents ready? Partners ready? Judges, are you ready? AJ Grama.
Thank you.
Alright, then let's begin. So starting off, I would first like to present a third contention for our constructive. This third contention is going to be called Social Media is Unique. Social media's lack of accountability exacerbates the consequences of false allegations because the third party given in our definition is the entire interconnected world. Social media has little to no regulations over publication and content. Social media is unique from traditional media and journalism in the sense that TV news and radio are regulated by the FCC in the United States. The lack of regulation in social media across the world, especially in developing nations such as Indonesia, allows for misinformation and falsified claims. Increased scrutiny and regulation over slander and defamation should be required because of social media's inevitable permeation into every facet of society and should not be taken lightly. In some cases, free dialogue is ideal, but in serious legal cases such as these, scrutiny and integrity is necessary. The gist of this contention is basically saying that the entire nature of social media is the fact that it's unregulated. So due to the fact that we are under this resolution, we're talking about
Point.
slander and defamation, this unregulated language towards other people can actually get quite out of hand and actually get to a much worse point than any other traditional journalism would, due to the fact that there are significantly less regulations over the course of a lot of social media. Now that our third contention is out of the way and we have presented our whole entire case, I'm going to go on to refute their contentions. So their first contention, the basic idea of it, is that we want to spread word to others through this defamation, through this slandering. And yes, while I agree this is a method that you can project this information and spread the word, when we asked them in ploy, they said, absolutely, there are other methods of communicating this information. So what we can see here is, first of all, they kind of get this mixed up because this really isn't the only method of communication, and there's a lot more effective methods of communication, to be frank. But the real thing is, this contention falls because spreading the word to others through slander is not only ineffective, but you are demeaning someone of their own self-worth. That is not the cost that we want to be paying in order to get more information, especially when it can be obtained through other ways. This brings us to the definitions dispute that we've been going on through the first two speeches that I want to address. Now, they talked about libel, and the only difference between libel and defamation is that defamation needs to be proven in a court of law. That means that this falsehood is not only a proven falsehood, but it's also established by a jury to have seriously damaged someone's personal or professional life. Once again, I would like to remind you that both of the definitions that we provide to you from Black's Law Dictionary do provide information that this information is false, and thus for the rest of the round we should be debating about false information and how that relates to slandering and defamation. I will now continue on to the rest of their first contention. Talking about this scrutiny is not what we want at all, and they talked about freedom of speech a lot, and we played them about this in the example of yelling fire in a movie theater. And they cited the specific court case, but I wasn't necessarily sure how that defended their case all that well, because the point that we're trying to defend here is that freedom of speech is limited upon all the time. They can't necessarily say that this is some sort of infringement upon our free speech, because the fact of the matter is that slander and defamation is going to ruin someone's life. The definition of slander that we provided to you clearly states that it has some sort of catastrophic consequence on someone. Yes?
We think that in the case that someone has committed a violent crime against another individual, they probably deserve to face consequences. They don't deserve to be in the position of being a multi-million-dollar CEO of a company.
Okay, sure, but that's not the definition we provided to you. The definition we provided to you is not someone who has done a violent murder. The definition we provide to you is someone who's innocent and is being accused of falsehoods and these allegations that aren't true. The definition of slander and defamation that we provide to you don't revolve around that question at all. They rely on falsehood and the fact that this information that they're being that's being forced upon them isn't actually true, which kind of also goes in conjunction with your spreading word to others on your first contention, because it doesn't necessarily pertain to this. Now, your second contention is rather similar to your first contention, and I believe it was entitled that discussion is necessary. So when we're talking about discussion being necessary...
One clarification.
Yes?
Our first substantive argument was on the freedom of speech. Our second was on paying reparations to victims and survivors.
Okay, my apologies. So I did already address the first contention being freedom of speech a little earlier, and thus I will get into a little more bulk about the reparations to justice for these criminals. So first of all, in our second contention, under our definition framework, this doesn't necessarily apply to the resolution, but secondly, once again, and I want to make this incredibly clear, there are other ways to achieve justice for criminals if they have done something like this. Because the fact of the matter is that slandering someone, being hateful to them, is never the most optimal solution when you're talking about getting justice. It's never the best idea to fight fire with fire, and hate speech is never the answer towards someone else. So what we can see here is that this really isn't the right option, and never, ever should it ever be considered as such. And so because they're too... no, not now. Their first contention falls because freedom of speech is limited upon all the time, especially in the best interest of the safety of our people. Their second contention falls because discussion about claims such as these can be achieved in other ways, and it doesn't follow the framework that we have defined in the resolution. And because our three contentions stand strong, we can see no other vote than a vote in proposition of today's debate. Thank you.
Before I start, I'd like to go over a couple thank yous. I'm very grateful to my to my speech team captain, Mr. Paul Kennedy, for giving me this opportunity to be here today to learn all these things that I've learned, giving this amazing opportunity to be here and be where I am. I'm thankful to my entire team because they've showed me the importance of debate, and it's become a huge part of my life. And I'm also thankful to every single person who competed today because you've shown me new ideas and made me think about things in different ways. I'm grateful. I'm very grateful for this. All right. You guys may have to Are my opponents ready? Are my teammates ready? All right, then I shall begin. To begin, I will be going over a few of team propositions, contentions, and I'll be telling you why they fall, and I'll be also simultaneously telling you why ours continue to stand. In team propositions first contention, they essentially stated that everyone has a right to a fair trial. And we completely agree. Everyone should have a right to a fair trial. And that is why we are so proud to oppose today's motion. Because under today's motion, people will not be having a right to a fair trial. Because these people will not be having a right to a trial at all. When people are not able to voice their opinion, when they're not able to go out on social media and share these things that happen to them, because it's not quite as easy to go to maybe a media source and voice these opinions, especially in cases like sexual assault. So we see when people are able to voice these opinions and voice what happened to them on social media, they're able to actually get the tide rolling so they can actually have these free trials, so they can actually have these trials. Now, on their second contention, they stated that instead of looking to social media, we should look to journalists, because journalism is these journalists are accredited. However, we completely disagree with the idea that in order to in order for a person to be able to express their right to freedom of speech, they have to get a journalism degree. That is not the case. The Constitution does not state in the First Amendment that Congress shall make no law infringing on the freedom of speech of media. No, it states that Congress shall make no law infringing on the freedom of speech of the people. Therefore, the people should be able to express their freedom of speech, and they don't need to necessarily get a journalism degree in order to do this. Furthermore, in a point of information, they stated that freedom of speech is limited in certain cases. We completely agree. You're not allowed to go to an auditorium and shout fire. That is very true. However, we tell you that freedom of speech. We bring up the clear and present danger test. And we can see that when we apply the clear and present danger test to this motion, we see that a person's defamation is not clear and present danger. It does not trigger this. Therefore, this speech is protected by the U.S. Constitution. So therefore, the arguments that they make that freedom of speech is not protected in these cases is not true at all. Additionally, another point of clash that's occurred throughout today's debate is whether or not slander and defamation have to be necessarily true. Now, side proposition will tell you, yes, absolutely. In fact, they cited Black Law's dictionary. However, if this were true, we wouldn't be having today's debate. We could all pack up our bags and go. This is not the case. In order to actually have a debate, we have to consider the fact that that defamation and slander is not true, and therefore we provided to you definitions definitions that are operable in order for us to have this debate. So, additionally, their second speaker made a point that social media is widespread and hard to accredit, because when people make accusations, they can't necessarily be accredited. However, Maddie pointed out in a point of information, stated that only 2%, when we looked at just sexual assault, only 2% of sexual assault allegations are false. 2%, compared to the 33% of people, of women who are at risk of being raped in their lifetime. And we can see that this is significantly greater than any kind of inability to accredit these, because we see that this isn't necessarily that big of an issue. So when team proposition tries to tell you that that is not necessarily true. Furthermore, social media is still bound to a nation's law. For example, in countries like Germany, where hate speech is not allowed, we see that when people try and use hate speech on the internet, whether it be through social media or not, we see that this is in violation of the country's law, and therefore it's not allowed, and therefore we can't really consider this example. Now, I'd like to move on to our third contention: the fact that the importance of holding people in positions of power accountable. The classical interpretation of rule of law, according to the Magna Carta in the 13th century, is that no one is above the law. And because today's motion will stand as a barrier to the rule of law and hinder the ability to hold people in positions of power accountable, that we are so proud to oppose. We'd be analyzing this through a couple of different lenses. Our first lens is a moderate approach to holding these people in power accountable. We've seen this in the United States. We've seen it in the Trump-Russia investigations, where social media was used to create a push in order to place the pressure on the government to investigate President Donald Trump and his possible collusions with Russia. And this is one of the most powerful people in the world. And we see that because of this push through social media, we saw that this is actually able to create progress in order to try and apply the rule of law. And we see that this is very important. Under today's motion, this push would have been prevented, and it is very likely that it would not have happened because this social media backing to this subtle pressure placed on the government by social media would never have existed, and we probably wouldn't see this investigation occurring. However, this investigation has yet to actually reveal anything incriminating. Yet despite this, we see rule of law being upheld, and this ensures that our leaders are being held accountable, which is very important to our democracy. However, we have to remember that this protection to rule of law only applies to Western democracies where it's constitutionally protected, and this brings us to our second lens, a radical approach to holding people in power accountable. Without the protection of the rule of law, societal pressures through social media will manifest themselves in more radical means. For example, the Arab Spring, where the public outcry against incumbent Egyptian president using platforms like social media, such as Facebook, including Facebook, led to revolts against the oppressive governments. And this led to the eventual overthrowing of the incumbent president. This was seen across the Middle East in 2011, and we eventually dubbed this the Arab Spring. This is yet just another example of how, by not restricting societal pressures placed on the government through social media, we are able to hold people in positions of power who otherwise would not have been held accountable. We are able to hold these specific people accountable. Before I continue, I'll take this point of clarification of information.
So how is this example related to this resolution, given that we're talking about slandering individuals rather than a government entity?
Because, like I stated, it was used to slander the Egyptian president, an individual. Now, we see that this is very important because if we weren't able to do this, we probably wouldn't have seen the overthrow of the present Egyptian leader, and we wouldn't have seen progress being made in these countries. We wouldn't have seen world progress occurring. And under this motion, social media would not have been allowed to be used in this means, and therefore, we wouldn't have seen this progress occurring. Now, like I stated, under today's motion, social media can no longer be used to create these societal pressures. And that leads to things like the Trump investigation and the Arab Spring. It leads to these things not occurring. And thus, we are so proud to oppose, because these things lead to progress. And inside opposition, we support progress.
My name is Nauman. Start with that. I'd also like to give a few thank yous. Of course, thank you to my parents. I couldn't be here, but they've supported me through the debate for quite a few years. I'm so thankful for my world school team and both teams that are here from Westside. I'm really proud of you guys. This is my last year debating, but you guys are going to have a couple more years, and you guys are going to do really well. I'm really proud of you. It's kind of a full circle moment. I'd like to thank Shruti. We were on the first Worlds team I was on was with her. I kind of fell in love with debate after that. It's been a great time. So, if everyone's ready, let's begin. The burden of the opposition is to show that false allegations of those who have been publicly accused should not be prevented on social media. This is clear by the definitions in Black's Law Dictionary, which separates libel simply by the adjudication of a jury in a trial. And it's the only definition, separation in the definitions. Both definitions for slander and defamation both say that they are false allegations in Black's Law Dictionary. If they are still unclear about this, they can take up with the book and yell at it in the hallway after this round, but this is what we're using because of the most widely accepted legal dictionary available to us. So with that in mind, I'd like to jump into their freedom of speech point. Dr. Ford had the backing of substantiated articles and evidence from journalists, largely substantiated through credible investigation with the therapists and with the people that knew her at the time. This substantiation is what makes us feel sympathy for her, which makes us believe her claims of sexual assault. And that's really important because in a world of false allegations, most of them are true. So we can't let the few falsehoods skew the trials and skew the public opinions of those that were should actually be convicted of this wrongdoing.
Wait.
Not really. To use another example, with Harvey Weinstein, he was accused largely anonymously by hundreds and hundreds of women, but because of journalistic integrity, we could establish credibility, and that's something social media uniquely is not capable of. That's why social media has been singled out in this resolution. For obvious reasons, social media does not have the credibility that journalistic means do for investigating and other purposes. Yeah.
You concede that the majority of sexual assault allegations are true,
Absolutely.
but considering the fact that only the minority of sexual assaulters are actually convicted of crime, why can't individuals
I'll
seek
get to
redress for this through social media?
That's a good question. As I kind of already stated, in social media, there's no instances of investigating, or there's no credibility associated with social media. So we really, really need to empower women and have them have a fair shake in with the police and trials, and that's a cultural shift and a legal shift in the justice system that needs to happen. However, the point of this resolution is saying that to make these trials less skewed, to eliminate all of the false information, cutting it off at its source with social media leaves just the best credible sources, which hopefully in the future can be used to empower women. Yeah.
So if you, as you stated, you truly believe in empowering women, why would you take their most available source of reaching regress through sexual assault away from them?
First of all, the resolution says that you simply cannot post slanderous or defamatory things. So if you have a substantiated claim, if you've gone to the police, if you have credibility that's built in, and again, we need more investigation to gain more credibility, because it's a huge problem. But we need to gain more credibility in these allegations so that when they are posted on social media, they aren't taken down for being false. If more are credible, then more can be in the public dialogue, right? This isn't saying all accusations need to be taken off of social media. All the resolution is saying is that more scrutiny needs to be made so that the false ones are taken down. That those are prevented from being on social media for any long period of time because they're slanderous, because they're defamatory, right? So I hope that's clear. Speaking to reparations to survivors, isn't it true that an abundance of falsehoods would skew the trial and make it harder to convict someone who actually did something wrong? If someone actually committed a crime and then there are falsehoods associated with this, spread through social media like wildfire, like ink and water, this heavily skews the trial to make the jury obviously a lot more worried about convicting an innocent man. If we know that there are falsehoods being spread through social media, we would be a lot more wary of giving someone a guilty determination. The only difference between libel and defamation is that the latter needs to be proven in a court of law. So luckily, this resolution is going so far as to establish these are proven falsehoods that are also proven to have damaged someone's credibility, whether in the workplace, with their family, whether their job is affected, their career, their home, anything like this that is proven to have had serious negative detrimental effects to their life, that those have occurred. And these are innocent people, and even though most of the people that are accused did do something wrong, the minority that didn't do anything wrong not only need a fair shake, but that section needs to be taken out of the discussion. There needs to be more credibility, more scrutiny, and more investigation, and that's only achieved through preventing falsehoods from circulating. I'd like to move on to some more things about journalistic integrity, but feel free to stand up later. The ugly truth is that social media is extremely capable of spreading false news. This is unique to social media. Mainstream media, credible journalistic websites that pursue these truths and investigate, they have credibility associated with them. And not only is having falsehoods spread through a platform with no regulation, no FCC regulation in the US, and no regulation across the world. We mentioned Indonesia as a factual example. This is morally detrimental to the world, to society. And this infringes on all of the ideas of justice, as we've discussed in trials. Journalists have degrees for reporting the news. We were kind of mischaracterized by saying freedom of speech only applies to journalists with degrees. No, we're saying journalists have degrees, and so we have to take them more seriously because they do real investigative work that's background check. And just like with the Dr. Ford example, we went to the therapist, we went to etc., so that we had empirical data, we had information that proved these things likely weren't false. And that's an important distinction. Because of that degree, they are more credible. Because of the work that they do and the methods in which they utilize, they're more credible. And that's the distinction. In court, one of the inherent rights people have under a justice system is due process. And due process would clearly be infringed upon heavily by allowing false allegations to circulate around social media, just so that we don't infringe on anyone's freedom to publish content that isn't verified. I think that's a price to pay. Like, people shouldn't be able to post anything that's false just because there are no regulations on a platform, and somehow that's okay. It's not okay, and it detrimentally affects those who are guilty of a crime, the victims of those people, because it's harder for them to seek real justice. It skews the trials, and it skews public opinion negatively. And with that, there's only a vote for the proposition in my mind. Thank you very much.
Hello, I'm Maddie Butler. I'll be the third opposition speaker. Before beginning, I'd like to extend a few thank yous. First, to my wonderful coach, Mr. Kennedy. Second, to my parents, who are in the back of the room watching right now. Thank you for supporting me, not just today, but also for the past 5 years that I've done debate. And to our wide debate family, as we like to call it, which includes our team who's up here on stage, but also the rest of our team who's competing with us today, even who's graduated and is still here supporting us, and to our competitors who continuously make us better. The entirety of the advocacy of team proposition in today's debate has a chilling effect on societal discussion, in which the only people who are allowed to start discussions are the courts and credentialed journalists, not people who have been faced with wrongdoing, not people such as you and I. It is because we think that this is abhorrent that we are continuously proud to oppose today's House motion. I'll be doing a few things throughout this speech, asking 3 key questions that determine for you that the opposition takes today's round. First, the question, what actually is our advocacy? Second, are current court systems effective? And finally, should we prioritize the rights of the accused or the accuser? On the first question, what is our advocacy? It's unfortunate that our advocacy on-site opposition has been misconstrued so much that I have to come up here and tell you in the third speech on the opposition what our advocacy actually is, but I'll give it to you. First, we told you in our very first point that we do not advocate for an entirely unregulated social media. Yet we heard the second speaker on the proposition tell you that the entirety of their third argument was premised upon the idea that social media is uniquely harmful simply because it's unregulated. We've told you from our very first speech that this is simply untrue. The laws of nations forbidding certain expressions of speech would still apply on our side of the House. This looks like laws against hate speech in Germany, for example, laws in the United States forbidding things like cyberbullying, like revenge porn, or calls for lawless action by individuals. We still support preventing all of these forms of speech on our side of the House. But the second major area of clarification on our advocacy is on the definition of slander and of defamation. We think that side proposition was entirely running from the heart of today's debate, from why we are all here, when they attempted to win the debate simply at the level of their definition. We think that when they tried to block out any true claims which may harm or slander an individual's reputation, they only did so because they didn't want to engage with the heart of the motion. We think that if what we're actually here talking about today was whether or not we think things published on social media should be true, we could have all packed up our bags and gone as soon as we knew that we were debating for the opposition. But second, even if you believe that their definition of slander is slanders being untrue, again, we think this only applies to libel, this isn't actually slander. We think that even if you believe that definition, we still wrote down the definition that they gave you of defamation in their very first speech as simply harming an individual's reputation. They never stated in their first speech that defamation was inherently untrue. This is an inconsistency on this side. We think that we won this definition debate in Abidemi's speech, in my speech, and frankly, we'd like to move on to the heart of the motion. So on the second question, are current court systems effective? First, are they effective? First, are they effective for the underrepresented? The team proposition throughout today's debate places an immense amount of faith in the status quo, in the ability of the courts to administer justice. They tell you that there are other ways, additionally, other ways outside of social media that are available options for individuals to pursue justice. What are the two main other ways that we've actually talked about in today's debate? I'll be addressing both of them. First, why the courts are ineffective, and second, why journalists are. We've given you multiple examples that have gone unengaged with on side proposition of when the courts did not adequately administer justice to the people they are meant to represent. We gave you the example of Brock Turner, a convicted rapist who was still only sentenced by a judge for a meager 6 months. We don't think this provides redress to individuals. We think these individuals should be able to continue this societal discussion on social media. This went unengaged with by side proposition. But then we gave you the example of President Trump, who's been under prolonged investigation by the federal government and still has not been convicted of anything because his power is above that of the courts. We don't think that the courts work in providing justice to these individuals. Finally, on the issue of empowering women, the answer to providing women with justice isn't simply the abstract of empowerment. This fails to solve for the structural inequality of the court systems in which women are empowered to seek justice, but the courts refuse to provide it. Now, on the second alternative that they give you, they tell you that when instead of sharing their own stories through social media, individuals should have to seek journalists to tell them their stories for them. We think that this is an infringement upon the free speech, the quality of free speech that we told you about in our first argument, as being enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights as a basic fundamental right. We think that in no way should the freedom of speech be contingent upon a person having a journalism degree. We don't think that journalists are the only people allowed to share their stories. Additionally, the main claim they make here is that what is shared by a journalist is inherently going to be true. We think that this is a false claim, seeing as journalists often share false stories. There is rampant false media that's not only pertaining to information which is published by an individual on their own social media account. But we think that the second major issue with journalists is that this is highly inaccessible by the major stakeholder that we've told you about throughout the entirety of today's debate, survivors of sexual assault. We think that the thoughts of the thousands of women with untested rape kits who we told you about in our first speech, trying to each find a journalist to tell their story for them, instead of being able to petition for redress through social media, is an impractical claim, and it's important to make someone go through that after all they've already been through. But now, on our third and final question, should we prioritize the rights of the accused or the accuser? First, pertaining to the area of sexual assault. I asked a point of information of both the first speaker and the third speaker, asking them if the majority of accusations pertaining to sexual assault are true, which they agreed with me in their last speech, but only the minority of instances do the courts actually administer justice. Do the courts actually convict people who are accused of sexual assault and who committed it? Then shouldn't we prioritize the fact that women have a 33% chance of being sexually assaulted in their lifetime over the 2% of false allegations that actually exist? We think we have to prioritize the group that is truly vulnerable here, not the group that Team Proposition tries to make you feel sympathy for. Now, on the issue that was brought up in their last speech where Team Proposition told you about the instance of Dr. Ford, how she sought credibility through speaking with her therapist instead of simply speaking with her. The issue here is that Dr. Ford was still not believed, Justice Kavanaugh was still sent into office, and then Dr. Ford's only way to petition the media to petition the public was through social media to continue to keep social discussion going, to continue to share her story. But finally, on the issue of due process, we think first, Abidemi already told you that Team Proposition failed to provide an analysis of why this due process is a right outside of United States documentation. We think that this is a global debate, and so they have to engage further. But second, seeing as they did this, let's look at how this right is actually administered within the United States. The proposition misconstrues how this right to due process actually works. The right to due process is the right to only be convicted after a trial. It's not the right to avoid accusation until after a trial has been undergone. If that were the case, trials would never start because accusations would never be allowed. That's exactly what we see the proposition enforcing when it pertains to social media. If an individual is never able to make the claim that President Trump is dealing in mishandlings of the federal government, then the federal government is never going to be incentivized by public discussion to actually investigate those things. Finally, we think that in the case, we don't think that public condemnation is the same as jail time. We don't think this conviction is the same here. But in the case that punitive societal actions actually do result for the accused, we think that insofar as the proposition has conceded the majority of these accusations are true, these people probably deserve not to be multimillionaires as CEOs running companies. We think they deserve to face punishments for the actions that they've committed. It's because we stand with the underrepresented in traditional court systems that we are proud to propose. Thank you.
Throughout the speech, I'll be crystallizing today's debate and going over side proposition and opposition's contentions and telling you why they still stand. However, to understand this, we'll be going through principal and practical arguments made throughout today's debate. First, the principal arguments. The main principal argument in today's debate is whether or not freedom of speech should apply to journalists, or whether or not it should apply to journalists just as they should apply to individuals. Side proposition tells you that no, because of a journalist degree, they're held to a higher degree, a higher standard. That the fact that these things are accredited, supposedly accredited, that therefore the journalists, that rather people should go to like the media, the real media, journalism rather than social media, because this is only individuals. However, we tell you this is not true. We tell you that everyone has a chance to express their freedom of speech. We bring to you the first contention. We bring to you case law that shows you that what they tell you is not protected is actually protected speech. So therefore, the arguments that they make in the principle that freedom of speech should apply to journalists more than it should apply to individuals is not true. Therefore, under today's motion, we would be restricting the freedom of speech of individuals, and therefore our contention still stands. Now, let's move on to the practical arguments made throughout today's debate. First, side proposition tells you that in order to protect the court's integrity, that we must limit the allegations. We must ensure that these allegations that they're seeing have been accredited. However, we have to look to the importance of it. We have to look to the purpose of the courts. If the court's purpose was to prove that something that was true was already true, we would not have the courts. The court's purpose is to determine whether or not these things are true. Therefore, the courts need to hear all allegations. They don't simply need to hear the allegations that go through the media. They don't need to hear the allegations that have been accredited. They need to hear all of these allegations. And therefore, we should not be taking away people's rights to make allegations because these have real impacts. As Maddie has shown you and has come up time and time again throughout today's debate, 33% of women have the potential to be raped in their lifetime. And 2% of these allegations, the vast allegations that they agree that these allegations are, the vast majority of them are true. We tell you that 2% of these are false, and they completely agree. And therefore, we should not be restricting these people's ability to reach regression and in order to reach reparations for these grievous acts committed against them. Furthermore, we've shown you how this would hurt people internationally. We've shown you how the Arab Spring and how things like the Trump and Russia investigation would not have occurred under today's motion. We tell you that because of the freedom of speech, because of the infringement on the freedom of speech that we will see under today's motion, we tell you that this actually has real impact on the international world. It has impacts in the United States. We tell you that this will affect the United States because in the United States we wouldn't have these investigations. We wouldn't be holding these people accountable for their actions. Therefore, leaders will continue to do corrupt things because they understand that, well, the actual people that they're governing, they understand these people can't necessarily address these issues. They can't hold these people accountable through social media. So if we take away one of those vital tools for people to hold their politicians and government officials accountable, we said these people will not be actually held accountable, and they won't be subject to rule of law. Furthermore, as I showed you in the Arab Spring, we tell you that these progresses made in the Middle East would not have occurred under today's motion because social media was such a vital part of that social push to overthrow these oppressive governments that if we took social media away because these allegations had never been accredited, then this wouldn't have happened. We wouldn't have had this progress. And that essentially is what would happen in the world of side opposition. So throughout today's debate, because side opposition believes in those who are making these accusations, we believe in the people. Because of this, we continue to oppose today's motion because we believe in the people, and we believe in the courts, and we believe in the international impacts on the limitations of speech. Thank you.
Partners, are you ready? Phones, are you ready?
Yes.
Judges, are you all ready? Alright, let's begin. So just like my opponent, I will crystallize this entire round by going over our case and their case and showing you why our contentions stand and their contentions fall. So starting with their first contention of freedom of speech spreading the words to others. Well, first of all, what we say is that freedom of speech is limited, and they seem to keep citing this example of the fire. We brought this example of fire in the theater, and they refuted it, but once again, they haven't necessarily explained how this limiting of freedom of speech actually bolsters their case in any sort of way, and thus their first contention falls. But even more so, relating to their second contention, we brought up as a major point in my second speech that there are much better ways to accuse people of these sorts of allegations rather than slandering them with hate speech and just defaming them as the words of the revolution state. Now, they never addressed this throughout the entire round, and this is an incredibly critical part of the round because this just shows that when we actually open up, that this actually is never the answer. They haven't refuted this at all, so we can already understand that this is never the answer when trying to achieve justice for someone. As I said earlier, you can't fight fire with fire, and this is an even greater problem, and we shouldn't have to rely on this as our only solution. Now, talking about what they were saying, they were talking about journalists being held to a higher standard, and yes, that is what we're saying. However, under our framework, someone's life has been ruined. That's the definition we brought up for slander. Someone's life has been ruined, they've lost their career, something of great importance in their life. When it's this serious, seeking credibility is a benefit for the courts and the victims. This isn't about going online and saying, I'm a Democrat or a Republican. This is a serious defamatory claim. Now, going back to the Dr. Ford example, online claims wouldn't have helped Dr. Ford in her allegations against Brett Kavanaugh. So why can we assume that we have to use these online allegations and value them higher than real-world journalist allegations, which are the most important things, because when something just this serious happens, that is what we need to resort to. Now, moving back to our framework, once again, we want to iterate. We did bring up definitions, and when we were talking about the definition of defamation, it did include false information at the end of it. They seem to have misrepresented that, and we did repeat it. We had it in our first speech, and we repeated it throughout the round. Defamation in the Black's Law Dictionary that we saw as the only definition was false information. And that was the book that we decided to use as our source material, and that was the definition that we found. Now, when we're talking about slandering, we talked about lives being ruined. So don't necessarily disregard our framework entirely, because our framework is based upon Black's Law Dictionary's own definitions of slander and defamation. That shouldn't be disregarded, and that's incredibly important because we shouldn't be slandering innocent individuals for things that they've done. And finally, I want to say that what they're saying through the held to a higher standard isn't necessarily topical to slander and defame because of what I said earlier. social media claims, if they were this serious, would have gone to a higher credibility journalist, as we said in our second contention, which still stands strong. Our first contention and second contention still stand strong because, as we can see, the job of the courts is to uphold the law, and what we can see here is that when it is this serious, we will see core allegations. Our third contention stands strong because even though they clarified in the middle, in their first speech, that they're not talking about social media being unique, the simple fact is, it's still true. The nature of social media is unique and there are no regulations on it, and we can't just simply disregard it because they said they disregarded it in their first speech. That's completely preposterous, and the fact that they disregarded our entire contention because of that doesn't make any sense. Their first contention falls because I addressed it earlier. Their second contention falls because they didn't address a key point that I made during the round. And their third contention falls because we can't necessarily weigh these historical examples taking great precedence over what we're talking about today. And for these reasons, we urge a vote in team proposition in today's round. Thank you.